to shoot. Crossover. Up, under, and in! Houston and the Cougars with 33 wins and a number 3 seed are coming out of Tulsa, and they are heading to Kansas City in the Sweet 16. It's over. The dream is alive for Houston. For the first time in 37 years, the Cougars are going to the Final Four. Creasa gets it back. Three-pointer on its way. Air ball. Edwards has the rebound. An Arizona foul, and the Houston Cougars put a smile on the Dream's face.
Welcome to the Scotland Home Podcast, back. Our first episode during what is technically March Madness, since we had the first playing game tip-off a little over an hour ago, Bobby. I was going to say, if you didn't listen to our instant react, and if you did not, I would encourage you to go back and do so. If this is your first time listening to our special March Madness intro, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're enjoying being in the week of, in my opinion, the creme de la creme of American sporting events. Obviously have some non-Cougar men's basketball stuff to talk about tonight because other sports are still competing. Number of good stuff there, some not so good stuff, but a number of things to kick around from the Cougar week that was, including what the men's basketball team has been up to. Maybe a little more percolated thoughts, more marinated thoughts after our instant react on Sunday early evening. Bobby, how you doing, friend?
Wonderful, man. I got to play a round of golf today. I was off work, so went out. It was killer winds out there, gusts up to like 40, sustained winds of in the 20s. So it was a brutal day out there. But at the end of the day, you're still playing golf. So how bad is life actually?
I played my racket sport last night, and it wasn't 40, but it was like I would say like gusting 25, 30 here, and it was alternately like very funny, and also just like you'd hit a shot and it would just take a left turn into out of bounds, and you're like, yeah, that'll happen tonight.
I started one like 40 yards right of the green and was just like, ride the wind, baby. And it did. It was a nice little shot. So.
Yeah, the wind giveth, the wind taketh. But
yes,
enough of our amateur athletic pursuits. We're going to talk Cougars. And even in an episode that I think we have correctly billed as not entirely about the men's basketball team in the NCAA tournament, the topic that's going to lead the show, of course, is your number 3 overall seeded Houston Cougars, who will be playing on Thursday at 1 p.m. on TBS. I'm assuming preempting TBS's usual schedule of American Dad reruns. Don't worry, Bobby. I had a Impractical Jokers bit lined up if this game had landed on True TV. I would have learned at least 2 of their names for that.
One Sal. I know one Sal.
I drive by a billboard out here for Murr. Is there
okay,
a Murr?
Yeah, there is a Murr. There's a Murr.
So
we got Sal and Murr. We're good.
I know.
Next.
Shocker. A guy who's like a very fringy celebrity has some kind of big special in Vegas, the place where celebrities go to milk the last 5 minutes of the 15. But to the topic at hand, the Cougars will be playing their 16th seed opposition, the Cougars themselves as well, of SIU Edwardsville, or a little bit less of a mouthful, SIUE here in the Midwest region of this bracket. And we're going to get somebody who can speak a little more knowledgeably about the SIUE Cougars. Matthew Kamp, the sports editor of the Edwards Intelligencer. He, being a working journalist, was out covering a soccer game. His audio is a little choppy here and there. We weren't able to get all the questions we asked in there, but I thought Matt gave us some good insights, tried to piece together what we could from that. So here's Bobby and I talking to Matt about the SIUE Cougars. We're very excited to welcome to the Scott Holm Podcast for the first time tonight, Matthew Kamp, who is the sports editor for the Edwards Intelligencer. Matt, thanks for giving your little time out of your day to tell us about the Cougars from Edwardsville.
Yeah, appreciate it. Always good to talk about the Cougars, and first NCAA tournament appearance, so a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and this SIU team has gotten here with a pretty deep rotation of players. If you had to choose out of that group, which one player has been the most important one for SIUE getting to this point and being in the NCAA tournament for the first time, like you said?
It's Rayshawn Taylor. He's the Ohio Valley Conference Player of the Year. He's averaging 19 a game. He had 22 a game out at the Ohio Valley Conference tournament in the 2 games they played there. He's the all-time leading scorer in program history. He passed that mark in the OVC championship win over SEMO. and they go as Rayshon Taylor goes. When he has a good game, SIUE has a good game.
Well, excellent. So I'm not going to sit here and act like a lot of our listeners have watched a lot of SIUE basketball this year.
I watched the OVC championship game, so let's put that respect on me there.
We're also the hosts, not the listeners. So generally, how would you describe the way this SIUE team plays? Are they fast-paced, slow-paced? Do they focus on a big man? What are we going to see on Thursday when we have the Battle of the Cougars?
They're an interesting team. They have a lot of depth, like you said earlier, but they can run it through the point with Rayshon. His cousin, Brian Taylor II, is the third leading scorer, about 11 a game. And those two can do some damage along with Desmond Polk, who's been there for the last 5 years along with Rayshon. But then inside, they're a pretty big team for a mid-major. You have a 7-footer in Arden Zanikis. Ring Malith is another guy, 6'9", 6'10". He averages about 12 and 7. So they can go a little both. If the three-point shot is falling, you can see them kind of fall in love with it. But if they can get it down low and get the big guys going, they can do some damage. And those two guys can also hit the glass pretty hard. So they can get some extra possessions pretty easily.
On a team level, what are the areas that this SIU team does especially well, and how realistic is it that they could give Houston headaches by doing any of those things on Thursday afternoon?
They're kind of erratic when it comes to shooting the three, but when it's going, they're pretty hot and they can do some damage back there, and it can last a while. So it'll definitely have to be hitting their threes. They're a pretty good rebounding team, but so is Houston. So it'll be interesting to see how big of an advantage Houston can have on the glass, and if SIUE can close that gap. If they're able to close the gap, they could probably hang for a little bit and, give them a scare as a 16 seed. And then defensively, man-to-man, they can play pretty well together. They'll get out in transition if they get the turnovers.
So the two of us we know this story reasonably well, but for any of our listeners who don't know it, can you give us a little of the backstory of SIU head coach Brian Baroni and the special pair of scissors that have gotten at least some national news?
Yeah, so Brian came to SIUE, and I believe he served his 2 years as an assistant coach before taking over as head coach in 2019. And when he took over as head coach, he put a pair of scissors up on top of the locker room door and used that as motivation, saying these are the scissors we are going to use to cut down the nets when we win a tournament championship at the Ohio Valley Conference. So that was the premise behind it, and they got to break them out, of course, in Evansville a couple of weeks ago. And it's kind of funny. I was sitting next to him doing an on-court interview with him when taking out another pair of scissors, and Brian kind of said, "No, we're not using those scissors," and pulled his out, and we're using these right here. So he was pretty adamant about it, and guys were fired up about it. So it's definitely the motivational tool they wanted.
Well, it was such a cool story. When I saw it, Sam I was like, "Sam, have you seen this story?" And he was like, "No, what happened?" I sent it over to him, and he was like, "That is awesome." So, unfortunately, while we were going to be cheering for him in the tournament, unfortunately, we're probably not going to be doing that. But kind of staying on the topic of Coach, even before this Cougar team won the Ohio Valley Conference tournament and punched their NCAA tournament ticket, he still had this program in the middle of its probably best run in its D1 history. How's he found a way to succeed where others probably haven't?
So they had 14 straight losing seasons before. They had 3 straight winning seasons now. And Brian had he had the last 3 losing seasons and now 3 straight winning seasons with him. And a lot of it has to do with family. He preaches family. He has his kids around the program. He has the assistant coach's kids around the pro chart. I think that helps. I think there's that family buy-in of we're all in this together and we're going to all do it together. And that's kind of been what we've seen.
Matt, thanks for telling us about the SIUE Cougars. And I was going to say, hope we're treated to an entertaining game, but not too entertaining on this coming Thursday.
I appreciate the time. And no matter what, one of the Cougars is going to win tomorrow.
No doubt. Go Cougs. And we can all say go Cougs together.
wanted to say again, we really appreciated Matt's time talking with us about the SIUE Cougars. Even our audio wasn't the best, not Matt's fault. And it was good to learn a little bit more about Thursday's opposition. So, Bobby, what other thoughts do you have on SIUE?
I would say the first thing is it is March Madness. We have seen 16s beat ones. So you could never be 100% sure that you are going to win a game. That's why it's called Madness, right? But kind of looking back, if U of H loses this game, it's going to be U of H's worst loss of the year by far. And I think the Cougs should win this game handily. You kind of look at SIUE's record on the year, looks really good, 22-11. But then you look at some of their losses. They had a close one to Little Rock. Two of their losses, one was the Indiana fringe in NCAA team, Indiana. And then against somebody in Illinois, who's a pretty good team. Granted, they lost to Illinois by 32, clearly a pay game. But that Indiana loss, this is going to sound weird, but it's only a 19-point loss. They put up 61 against an Indiana team. But other than that, you look at their... Matt spoke about how their shooting can go cold, and when it does, it's hard for them to get back. We've seen that with other teams that U of H has played this year. And the problem that SIUE is going to see is if you do get cold, U of H isn't an easy team to kind of get it back on. So 255th in KenPom offense and 160 in defense. So that's a lot better, but overall, you really hope the Cougs can come away with this one, and you're not stressing about it at all.
The Houston Cougars. To be clear, Bobby has switched his allegiance. I'm kidding.
Yes.
I'm kidding. Mid thing,
Yes.
he hasn't decided to become an SIUE Edwardsville fan. The Cougs are still the Houston Cougars. I just want to say, I have an immense appreciation for coaches who achieve things that have never been achieved before in a program, like Brian Barone is doing at SIUE. I mean, they've only been a Division I program for 16, 17 years, and unless your whole Grand Canyon having kind of a weird AstroTurf situation there, becoming a D1 program, moving up from a lower level is really, really hard. Before Brian Barone took over in their short history, SIUE hadn't even had a winning record in conference play. And in that over a decade of seasons had only finished 500 once in conference play. Barone finished 500 the previous 2 seasons. This year they were 13-7. The Cougars were in OVC play, second behind the league regular season champ, Southeast Missouri. That's hard work. That's a harder job to do than what most Division I head coaches will do in their career. To get this team to the NCAA tournament for the first time is really, really hard work. I love their defensive intensity. I would say this is probably the best defensive team out of the 16 seeds in this field. And offensively, you can't let Rayshawn Taylor and Brian Taylor get hot from deep if you want this to be the least stressful tournament game we all have to live through the spring. But I think, like you, there's a reason why the Cougars are 20-something point favorites here. This team hasn't been a knockout punch kind of team generally in conference play, but also it's worth reminding ourselves it has been a good long while since you've seen a team this year of SIUE's profile. You did in the early season, but I mean, the worst team that you've seen in a few months is Oklahoma State or Colorado, and those were like inside the top 100 of KenPom kind of teams. I'm going back to I want to see like the last team that profiles kind of similarly to SIUE on the Cougar schedule. I guess it's probably
Toledo?
like Toledo or Hofstra. Yeah, those are probably the two, and those were decisive Cougar wins.
I mean, Hofstra's
well.
220. Hofstra's 220.
Toledo's 240.
SIUE is SIUE, I believe, is 217 is what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So
yep. Jackson State as well. Jackson State's a little bit worse, but ballpark.
Yep.
So it should be an easy Cougar win. If you don't have any more SIUE thoughts, Bobby, I was gonna lead into something that you wanted to talk about, and just generally, what other March Madness thoughts do you want us to kick around tonight?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna. I think we should spend a minute and, if Kelvin Sampson heard me talking like this, he'd come up and punch me in the throat. But I want to kind of look ahead to the round of 32.
LBSIUE.
LBSIUE, baby. No, you kind of look, and obviously the team that scares you is Gonzaga. They're a top 10 KenPom team. Really tough matchup. You look at their resume, though. the predictive metrics like Ken Palm, what's the other one?
Bart Torvik, you're close.
Torvik. The Torvik rating, they're really good there as well. So the predictive measures, everything that it says this team should be good, says they're good, but then you look at their record, you kind of look at the schedule, a loss in overtime to West Virginia. Granted, that was when West Virginia was playing really, 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 really good basketball. A loss by 1 in overtime to Kentucky. That one doesn't look like too bad of a loss. The UCLA loss, they lose by 3 in a neutral court semi-away game, according to Ken Palm. The one that really kind of stands out to you is that Oregon State-Santa Clara matchup where those two, you kind of drop, they dropped those two games. But you look around, wins versus Baylor. They beat a San Diego State team that we didn't beat. They beat a fringe tournament team in Indiana, like I said earlier. St. Mary's, number 22 in Ken Palm, they lost by 4 to St. Mary's, and then they lost by 7 to St. Mary's and beat St. Mary's in the conference championship game. I think I heard somewhere that was like St. Mary's hasn't beaten Gonzaga 3 times in a year, or like has swept them in like 20 years or something ridiculous like that. Like, it's a crazy number. So this Gonzaga team's really good, but I'm not going to say that I think Georgia's going to win this game, but you kind of look at Georgia's, they're not a slouch. You know what I mean? I mean, you look at their resume, a loss, neutral court to Marquette, but they beat a St. John's team that is playing crazy right now, that I might think is slightly overrated. I know they won the Big East and all that, but that's a win by 3 on a neutral site at St. John's. Beat an Oklahoma team, beat Kentucky by 13. Has wins versus Florida. People say Florida very well could win the national title this year. They're a 1 seed. Yeah. They're a 1 seed. They're probably the hottest team in America right now. Just won the SEC. Florida beat them by 5. Granted, it was at home. Beat a tournament team in Texas. I mean, this Georgia team isn't a slouch, right? Now, if you're asking me who would I rather play in the round of 32, I'd rather play Georgia. But this Gonzaga team, I think they're going to be kind of a sexy pick to win here and beat Georgia, and everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, this. I don't know if it's as simple as I probably made it sound on Sunday, but I still believe that if U of H and Gonzaga play, the winner of the round of 32 game there is going to the Final Four.
I'm also curious, this was something you and I discussed before we came on air. Would you right now stick with Gonzaga as the possible 8-9 seed, or would you trade scenarios right now, I guess, with Auburn? Would you go to where Auburn is right now, where they're facing potentially not guaranteed, Louisville has to get through Creighton to get to them, potentially facing though Louisville in their home state in Lexington to Kentucky, where they're going to have probably a de facto home crowd? Or would you stick with the Zags and the reality that's actually in front of us?
I think if I had to choose, I'm probably choosing to play the worst team at their place, right? Like, especially if I'm U of H. U of H has done really well on the road this year. Only conference loss is what? Home, right? I think Louisville is a different fan base than a lot of fan bases out there. You know they're going to travel no matter where they go, let alone an hour, 15 minutes outside of their arena. It is going to be very crowded. Auburn travels well too, though. But if it were U of H, I think I'd rather play Louisville in Lexington than having to play Gonzaga no matter where it is. What about you? What would you rather do?
I think I'm with you there. They're both tough matchups. I think Pat Kelsey at Louisville has done one of the best coaching jobs in the country. Even considering the ACC is down, I still believe Louisville getting an 8 is them actually being slightly underseeded. No, I would imagine Card fans don't hate the possibility of having that round of 32 matchup in Lexington against this somewhat reeling Auburn team, playing them in their home state. I would still rather the scenario where we're facing Louisville, a team that's worse than multiple teams that U of H beat on the road this season. Not saying the Cougars, zero chance they'd lose this game, but this is a road warrior type team. And I'd rather face the team, I'd also rather face the team full of guys in Louisville with no recent tournament experience versus Gonzaga, where there are guys in this roster who have 3 or 4 seasons of making deep runs in the NCAA tournament. I know it's only about the current season. You're only as good as the current season, but that's a program full of guys. It's like a program full of coaches that expect to be playing at least the second weekend of the dance. Whereas Louisville, not saying they won't become that program under Pat Kelsey, but it's an entirely new roster of guys, new coaching staff. I just feel like you see sometimes those teams, you sometimes see those teams catch fire. Jerome Tang and K-State 2 seasons ago is a good example, but oftentimes you see them kind of overachieve in the regular season and underachieve or go out earlier in the postseason. So those are both tough scenarios, but I think I'd take that one over facing Gonzaga, who's giving me like considerably more heartburn as a possible round of 32 matchup.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just absolutely, I cannot wait for the tournament to get started, even beyond the Cougs' large role in this tournament as one of the favorites to win it. It's just such a cool event. That first Thursday and Friday of games, you really can't beat it. I started watching the 16 seed playing game before we record this podcast between St. Francis and Alabama State. Shout out to my dad, who's actually in Dayton with his siblings and brother-in-law for that one. To me, sports don't get better than March Madness. Sports don't get better than having wall-to-wall winner-go-home games with the ultimate goal of winning the whole thing. I hope everyone listening finds a way to enjoy the tournament over the next handful of days as well, beyond just the Cougar games in it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite events as well. And as somebody who, as a kid, wasn't big into college sports, I grew up in a very pro town, as did you. But my parents didn't go to college; they were in the military, so like it was never a big deal to watch college sports. When the closest college to you is UTA, there's not a lot of college football. And then you had SMU, who nobody wanted to go see.
DFW really is. I'm not trying to say this like, oh, it's a Houston versus DFW really is kind of a basketball wasteland to some degree.
Yeah, and even like football
College.
and that kind of stuff. So like just kind of watching college basketball, I really kind of got into it. I would say late high school, early in college when I was going to games, really started following it. So it is a great time of year. I absolutely love it. And it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. So our leading non-hoop story tonight has to be the NCAA Indoor Track and Field Championships, which the Cougars sent 3 athletes to compete at last Friday and Saturday in Virginia Beach, Virginia. You had Keila Dove in the women's shot put, Andrea Mita in the men's high jump, and Jamar Marshall Jr. competing in the men's 60 hurdles. Coming into the event, Dove had the top performance of the current indoor season in her event. Mita had the second best in his. Both ended up being named first-team All-Americans in their respective events. Dove had her best career NCAA indoor performance, competing. This is her 4th time, actually, at this event, previously for UNT. Finished on the podium in 3rd place. Her best throw was 62 feet and half an inch. Really cool to watch one of the absolute best athletes in her discipline compete in her final college season for the Cougs. And we knew basically, I think it was actually, shout out to co-host Emeritus Dustin. I think it was Dustin that actually hipped me to it. Knew from basically the moment she committed to Cougar track and field last summer from UNT that Dove would be this level of athlete. Dove would be an athlete competing among the very best in the country at her discipline. But obviously also still really cool to see her add to an already stacked college resume while competing for the Cougars. Mita was competing in his first indoor championship of his career, finished 8th with a best clearance of 7 feet 1 inch. Like I said earlier, still good enough to earn first team All-American honors, and as importantly, got the Cougars their only point for the men's team in this event. I'm sure Mita will look at this event and feel like he could have performed a bit closer to what he did, say, at the Big 12 indoor meet or his career best performance back during the season at the Howie Ryan Invitational. But I think worth reiterating, he's only a sophomore, had this incredible breakout season after a promising freshman year. This season was in no uncertain terms. Mita announcing to us that he'll be one of this program's best athletes for as long as he's competing in college. And that's really cool. That's worth being excited about, even if he didn't get on the podium in this event.
Yeah, I think, I always like to celebrate Cougars doing well in the national championships. I always say, like, I've had this discussion with Coach Las Maria, right? If this happened in football and we made the semifinals and we lost in the semifinals on a last second kick, like, we'd be celebrating this team. It would be sold out. We'd be going crazy for it. So, you know, kind of the same with golf, not to move things over there, but just like, you know, they're top 25. Things are exciting. So always excited, and it should be celebrated whenever we place a podium at any NCAA championship.
Right, might even have a little bit of golf to talk about here, and not too long. We'll also note, just while closing on indoor track and field here, Jamar Marshall Jr. Earned second team All-American honors in the 60 hurdles. Ultimately finished with the 16th fastest time out of all the events prelims. Still incredibly difficult to make it this far. So shout out to Marshall, working his way back to NCAA indoors. Was actually last here in 2022 while he was competing at Arizona State. So always cool. Like, even getting this far still puts you in the top very small percentage of athletes like in the world at your respective event. So up next in the world of Cougar track and field, we have finally, I say finally, like the indoor season wasn't going on less than a week ago, the start of outdoor season, more specifically on Thursday. It's a one-day meet, probably tomorrow or today as you're listening, at the Kirk Baptiste Invitational on campus at the Carl Lewis International Complex at the University of Houston. So I think the signature early season event is going to be the Texas Relays next week. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm excited to see the Cougars compete in. I would argue that's the early season outdoor meet, always a stacked field of competitors, and thus I think we'll get a good idea of what events U of H may be a serious player in. Briefly, we'll mention on the subject of NCAA championships, Cougar Swim and Dive has just started competing in its NCAA championships out in Federal Way, Washington, which we will kick around on next week's podcast. And of course, the past week has given us some good news from the Lynx as we will mosey on over to Cougar Golf Corner.
Right, so let's talk Cougar golf here. The ladies, I think last time we talked about their win, and I compared it to the what was it, like the Big Sky versus
the Cougars are playing in the Big Sky Big 12 Invitational. It's like you won it by a ton of strokes, but also right. Not a stacked field.
Yeah. So so just kind of reiterate that. But the men did compete. They actually wrapped up today, probably a couple hours ago, in the All-American Intercollegiate, which U of H is the host of. So it is hosted at the golf course of Houston up in Humble. I actually had the pleasure of playing it last week, I think was when I was there. Great course. Absolutely kicked my butt. It was insane. The wind was blowing like crazy. That's not the full story here. But what was really nice is the Cougars come away with a win. Now, they win this event. So looking at the list of teams, I didn't get too excited, right? There's only one ranked team among everyone here, and that's UNLV, Sam's second favorite school. Number 16 in the country are the Golfin' Rebs. That's what I'm calling them. I don't care.
As I say, I think it would be the driving Rebs or the swinging Rebs. Supposedly, like you're supposed to have like I made the assumption that the Running Rebels were a football team. No, Running Rebels are exclusively men's basketball.
I did know that. I did know that.
Baseball is the Hustlin' Rebels. So I guess
okay, interesting.
Swinging Rebels would be my.
We'll call them the Swinging Rebels. That's what we're going with now. And UNLV can write us a cease and desist if they want to. But if I see it on a T-shirt from their golf team, I'm calling it in here. So anyways, they were the only ranked team here, number 16 in the country. Cougs actually beat them by 32 strokes. So, or I can do math. Yeah, 32 strokes. Some of the teams to also kind of mention that were here. You had one fellow Big 12 team, and you absolutely beat them by 17 in TCU. Some standout performances. When you win a tournament by this much, obviously you played really well. Your individuals played really well. Chi Chun Chin comes in at 6 under, finishing in second. Wolfgang Glow comes in at 5 under, finishing third. Hudson Weibel finishes at 2 under for 6th place. Jake Yaboro finishes in 17th place. And Lorenz Schreigen finishes at 2 over, but finishes in 20th place. So every one of your golfers finishes in the top 20. You also brought a B team. They shot 37 over, didn't do so hot, but that's going to be a lot of your younger guys who are, you just kind of need experience, right? Everyone says tournament golf is way different than just going out playing with your friends, and it absolutely is. But I would also imagine tournament golf from high school to college is also very different, just like going from high school to college in any sport is. So, not gonna harp too much on scores anyone did on the B team. Grant Doggett did go 3 over to finish 21st. Everyone else, we went out, we had a good time, and we got the experience that we needed there. But overall, Cougs win their home tournament, which is always good. Even though you look at the competition, like I said, still really happy with a win. Hard to argue and be upset when you do win, no matter who you are playing.
Yeah, good bounce back. I think the last time we talked to the men's team, it was off I think they'd finished last in an event, and wasn't feeling so hot. So good to have something that's, I think, a little bit closer to a bounce back.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great point. It does just kind of an interesting note here. It definitely looks like conditions got much harder in round 3. So seeing some of the individuals kind of tumble down the leaderboard like they did kind of sucks, but it lets you know you're hitting the ball well. If it was just a round 3 tournament, you would have finished in 3rd, 1 shot off. So overall, you feel pretty happy. Looks like conditions down in Houston got a little difficult.
Sounds like it. So, gonna end on less happy recent results from the only bat and ball sport program that this school fields, as far as I know, the Cougar baseball program, who got swept over this past weekend by Texas Tech at home at Schrader Park. I guess the only small mercy right now is that the Big 12 men's basketball tournament was taking most people's attention, but I don't think I'm being unfair in saying this is about the worst case scenario for this team. Opening Big 12 play, we saw promising-ish stuff in non-conference play, nothing that made us start changing our early June travel plans to watch this team in the NCAAs, but maybe things that gave us the slightest hope that this year would at least be better than last year's pretty dismal Big 12 opening season. Like I said, Cougs got swept by the Red Raiders, got 1 hit and lost 4-1 on Friday, which was your most competitive game and your lone good pitching performance of the weekend. Lost 13-8 on Saturday and 11-1 on Sunday, game shortened to 8 innings for what I'm assuming is a combination of Tech's travel itinerary and the fact that they were up 10 on U of H. We've generally done a best hitter, pitcher, and that kind of thing. Other than Paul Schmitz and Antoine John, I think doing a good job on Friday night in tandem pitching with the Cougars. I won't take that away from them. I don't have anything nice to say about this weekend. I'm back to thinking this is one of the Big 12's worst programs, a program not reaching close to its ceiling. I hope the rest of the season proves me wrong. I hope this is an outlier, but I don't think I am. That's really all I can say right now about Cougar baseball. Bobby, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think for me, it's you said a word when you started, and you said the word hope. And Sam, it's the hope that kills you, bud. It's the hope that kills you. It will always be disappointing whenever you get swept, let alone by a team like Texas Tech that hasn't played, like, not saying they're this terrible team, but they weren't great going into this weekend. I think the problem is, I mentioned it last week, a problem that I saw, and it kind of showed again. You just don't have arms to finish games, right? You have guys who can, your decent starters, even though Roman Ritchie did not do so hot, and your starters didn't look great going into in the weekend. But I feel like the starters are better than the bullpen. And just look at this Sunday, for instance. Yes, your starter gives up 4. You're not going to win any games like that. You have Kendall Hoffman come in. He pitches 4 innings. That's great, right? You love that. 4 innings, gives up 2 earned runs, gives up 3 runs in general. Okay, I don't.
You'll take that for a freshman. Hoffman's a freshman. He's been, I think, definitely a bright spot. Yeah.
And if Richie gives you an inning and gives up 2 earned runs, and this guy gives you up 3, you're still in the game, right? But then you have Andres Perez, a third of an inning. Michael Benzor pitches in 1 2/3 of an inning, gives up an earned run. Diego Luzardo, third of an inning, gives up 2 earned runs. It's just, man, it's rough right now. It is rough. I mean, the Cougs on Sunday had 4 errors.
It's been so long since this has looked like a good baseball team. Like you had flashes in 22 and 23.
Yeah.
I mean, you also in the AAC regular season, though I don't think you beat a lot of really good teams to get there. It flashes, and just again, like I want it to be different. I want it to work for this head coach. I love college baseball. It almost feels like you've been so kind of off people's radar as being a team any good for so long. Even in a state that's pretty baseball crazy like Texas, I feel like you almost that's the opportunity cost here. That's I think the biggest failure of the way Chris Pesman, a man who failed in many regards as an athletic director and as a person, but the loss of attention, the fact that even for someone like the only reason I ever watch Cougar baseball is I have obligation because I do a podcast. It is not at all part of my actual like watching sports for leisure anymore to like work in Cougar baseball. And I love college baseball. One of the first sports I loved in my life was college baseball. Like going to Reckling Park, and unfortunately watching our crosstown rivals. But don't worry, I eventually got some sense as I got into late adolescence, early adulthood, and became a Cougar.
Yeah, they were also good when you were that age.
They were also good. Which I mean, U of H actually was decent then too. Just U of H was 6-7 miles further away from where I lived at the time. But
Right.
to the point, like you're not just bad, but people just no longer notice or care. Like the few people who do notice aren't happy with how it's going. And I hope this is something that ages badly because the team finishes the regular season much stronger than they looked. And Tech was probably better than their 3 and whatever record coming in. Like they played a brutal start to the season. This isn't vintage Tech. This isn't the level of Tech that went to like 4 College World Series in a row a handful of years ago. Like this is a program that's been markedly worse, and you barely looked like you belonged in the same field as them.
Yep. I think the most disappointing thing for me, without a doubt, is the errors. I mean, and look, I'm not trying to give our coaching staff a pass here. That's got to be one of the most frustrating things for a Division I baseball coach is errors. It's just like, what are we? You've made the play 9 million times in your life. You would play weekends where you would play 6 games in a weekend.
You're a Division I baseball player.
You're a Division I baseball player, and you're booting ground balls. Like, shit. Like, that's got to be so frustrating. Not to give a pass there. It's got to be frustrating for your pitching staff too. Because one of the things, like, as somebody, I didn't play high level baseball, right? I played in high school. You would always tell your pitcher, even when I was like growing up, you tell your pitcher, like, hey man, pound if he's struggling, hey man, pound the strike zone. If they get a bat to a ball, we got your back. They didn't have his back.
No.
And so when you're a pitcher at that point, don't you just start to press a little bit? You start trying to get cute. You start trying to miss bats. And it's just like... And so it can just... I can only imagine what the mindset is going in there. That is just like, what in the world is happening right now?
Yeah, not how you want to start conference play.
Absolutely not.
Up next, the Cougars will be traveling to Orlando to take on the team that you like to call the Central Florida Golden Knights. They opened taking 2 of 3 from BYU and their Big 12 opener in Provo last weekend. Hate to end this episode on a downer note of this baseball program that doesn't seem to be especially good, but we have March Madness this week. We have Cougar stuff to be excited about. I think we can all be happy about that. Bobby, before my cats interrupt this podcast anymore, take us home, pal.
Well, that is it for this episode of the Scott and Holman podcast. We appreciate you guys so much. It is a shorter episode. We did most of our initial thoughts on the bracket on the instant react. So if you really want what we think of the bracket and all that kind of stuff, please go back, listen to that episode. We did want to give the shine to other sports as well. Once again, thank you to Matt Kamp from the Edwardsville Intelligencer. I almost had
You're
it
so close.
I had it written down here, and I just didn't nail it. Can't read my own handwriting. I buy fancy pens, and you can't read my handwriting. That's good. Good job, me. So, anyways, thank you so much for listening. If you have any feedback for us, please find us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at SH Podcast. You can find us on Blue Sky at podcast.bsky.social, and that is pod, PAWD, because it's a Cougar, Paul. You guys get it. I don't have to explain it to you. If you don't want to use social media, you are over that this year. 1, good for you. 2, you can still provide us feedback. Email us at shpodcast@gmail.com. And please, if you want to hear our March Madness preview with all the teams that actually made it into the tournament, one that didn't for some reason, and when we did that, we had assumed that they were probably going to be in the tournament. You can find us on Patreon. All you have to do is spend $5 a month. If you want to spend more, trust me, we will gladly take it. But that money goes to hosting this podcast and occasionally gets us to pay for a meal when we travel to go watch Cougar games. It's not a ton of money. Sam and I don't do this full time, but if you want to throw some dollars at us to show us some appreciation and to help support the work that we do here, please find us on Patreon, SH Podcast on Patreon. Sam, that's all I got. What do we always say?
Go Cougs.
All right. Go Cougs! Let's go!